Thank you, Manny. Good morning, everyone. I might ask in the meantime my panelists to join me on stage for the next discussion, please. Yes, feel free to come. In the meantime, I explain, as I said before, the objective of the next panel is to look at the policy and regulatory implications of the internet value chain. Our report includes no policy recommendations, but we believe that the analysis provides a useful input to some of the policy discussions we have in Europe today. We are very lucky. We have excellent speakers with us. We have, from my left, Josianne Cutajar, who is a member of the European Parliament. Also, she's part of the Conference of the Future of Europe, in particular the Digital Transformation Working Group, and has been working on digital decay, digitalization of SMEs, and many other digital issues. Pearse, who is Director for the Future Networks at the Commission, dealing with policy developments, research as regards 5G, IoT, cloud, data flows, service platforms, in short, I would say the internet value chain. Annemarie Sipkes, who serves as chair of BEREC this year, responsible for regulation of telecoms from the Dutch authority, and last but not least, Juan Montero, Chief Public Policy, Competition and Regulatory Officer at Telefónica, coordinates the strategy of the company on issues related to digital markets, public policy, competition law and regulation. I will ask questions from the panel in a minute and try to make sure that they make fair and proportionate contribution to the discussion. But I'm also planning to ask you in the audience at a later stage, and I will keep an eye on the chat for good questions from those of you who decided to join us online today. We had a important digital policy milestone in the Parliament yesterday. Congratulations. The ITRE committee adopted the report on the digital decade and the policy program. And digital decade sets out the vision for Europe's digital transformation. And my question would be, against and looking at the trends in the internet ecosystem, what are the biggest challenges to achieve the political ambition, and which of the digital decade objectives are the most challenging to meet, in your view?
Yes, first of all, thank you for this timely discussion. And yes, I do welcome the positive vote that we got yesterday during the ITRES committee on the Digital Decade program. Now this will go to trialogues and we'll have to await the discussions there too. But indeed, I welcome it a lot too. And yes, the challenges are there. And here I brought with me some figures from the last DESI index, which shows us that we need to do much more. And it's important that when we are doing our policy, we start from a reality check of where we are. And this is not to be pessimistic, but to be realistic and to make sure that our policy is based on facts. And indeed, the last DESI index shows that we need to do more on all the 4 dimensions of the digital compass. For example, in 2019, only 56 EU citizens possess at least basic digital skills, and there was only a slow increase year by year. The EU is still lacking these relevant skills, including when it comes to ICT specialists. And the skills is an important aspect, an important pillar that we definitely need to work towards. And with these digital targets and the policy program of the path towards the digital decade, we are taking concrete steps to have these ambitious targets to address them. Another aspect, I know a lot of you are also interested in connectivity here. According to the last DESI data, only 59% of households could benefit from very high capacity network, fixed very high capacity network. And this is a problem when we consider that we need to ensure that we have high connectivity, and also taking into account the challenge that we are currently facing, even after the COVID pandemic struck, that there has been a rise demand on the internet ecosystem and value chain, a huge demand for internet use. And this requires also that there's further investment and there is further connectivity. So this is a point I believe that we should keep in mind and see how we address this. But apart from the targets, we also need then a comprehensive framework, including a proper regulatory environment. This is indeed quite important. The new GSMA report provides quite a number of interesting insights, which I'm sure we'll have time to further discuss in this panel later on. But let's remember also that the internet has no borders, and therefore it's also the same for its value chain, and that we need to make sure that this important asset that we have, we treat it in a way that we regulate in a way, we put targets in a way that are beneficial for all users of the internet, both the operators, both the end consumers, and the various users there. So it's essential that we make a fair ecosystem when it comes to internet use, and we make also a fair digital environment, something which we're definitely working upon in the EU institutions at the moment.
Thanks, thank you, Josianne. I think we will come back to some of the issues you mentioned, but maybe I'll turn now to the Commission. So the GSMA reports highlights one of the key trends, the ongoing migration to cloud-based services and the investment need for additional computing functionality in the edge networks. Also, it was touched upon the previous panel discussion. I thought, what are the views from Europe point of view, from a regulator, policymaker point of view on the particular trend, Pearse?
Well, first of all, it's very important that it's being talked about. So whether it's the study or the panel we've just heard, we have to continuously ask ourselves, is the framework that we create actually encouraging, embracing these developments so that the economy and particularly society, all users, can benefit? So we have to constantly readdress what may have been a stable and appropriate framework 4 or 5 years ago. Is that still the case? And when we look at the challenges, I was very happy that you started by asking about the Digital Decade Programme and that the Parliament is making progress, because there, the first element, which is the political element, which are the digital principles that the Commission has proposed, do include effectively ensuring that all citizens have access to high capacity broadband and that they are able to avail of services. But in order to deliver that, are we actually supporting the investment to ensure that that network development can happen? So I was very interested by what I heard in the previous session. I'm glad that there is a sort of a full-on discussion about the development of cloud, which is, let's face it, in this context, while essential to the European economy, it is also an alternative model to a certain extent from the delivery, the telco delivery of telco services, including now, of course, high-speed internet access services, which may have unexpected and negative consequences on the investment environment, which could actually mean that we suddenly have a gap between the provision of advanced cloud and edge services, including what we call the telco edge, and the provision of the infrastructure that actually supplies this to the user, to small businesses and to the consumer. And that's something which we must anticipate. So the challenge for us, as you've seen with a number of things which the Commission has done or has announced that we're doing, we're looking again at the underlying models in terms of broadband cost reduction in relation to state aid for broadband. We're preparing a broadband cost reduction directive, and we're looking at a new access recommendation. So those are all attempts working with the industry, working with regulators who have such an important role to ensure that the model keeps abreast of what is happening. But underlying that, we all have to engage in a common effort to anticipate the disruptive effect, for example, of cloud, because that's the one that you mentioned, but particularly cloud operators, some cases who are already strongly integrated in the market, providing software services that nobody else can break into. And if that becomes then a pipeline all the way to the consumer, are we at risk, perhaps, for example, of recreating vertically integrated providers, just as we sought to, shall we say, remove from the market 20 years ago? And going back and reliving some of those problems. So that is a challenge which the Commission is addressing at the moment. with the digital principles, with the digital decade programme, and of course in revising the instruments that we have at our disposal.
Thank you, Pearse. Yeah, I mean, BEREC, I mean, and regulators in general over the past decades focus on the connectivity part of the internet value chain. And we've seen in the report there are a lot of developments. Also, you know, this one we just heard, and also the segments of the internet value chain are becoming more and more interdependent. So how do you see, you know, the changes in the internet value chain on BERECs and the regulators' way, how they adapt regulation to these realities?
Well, actually, thank you for that question. I think what we have done at BEREC is our mission is actually to promote meaningful end-to-end connectivity serving societal needs. And our three main strategic objectives, I think, still remain very urgent today. One is promote connectivity, promote full connectivity. And as already my colleagues from my predecessors, Josianne and Pearse, said, rollout of very high capacity networks remains very important. So that is our first strategic priority. Our second is to help promote sustainable open digital markets, because if you look at meaningful end-to-end connectivity, we should not just look at the old-fashioned end-to-end copper channels, as it were, but the internet ecosystem is a full-fledged ecosystem that is fundamental also to realizing meaningful end-to-end connectivity. And the third is to protect end-user needs. And I think all three of them, coupled with the fact that as regulators you want to make sure that you have evidence-based regulation with a deep knowledge of the markets, has also inspired BEREC to do various studies into the internet ecosystem. We will publish one study in a few weeks, which is actually called the Internet Ecosystem. And I do think, and I do see a lot of similar trends as were discussed in the first panel. And I think one of them is the fact that you have a whole new market dynamics that we didn't envisage a couple of years ago. As Pearse said, you see the hyperscalers, but you also see that that they start investing in infrastructure, such as submarine cables, such as, for example, how transit and peering and the internet exchanges, how those, it's not just growth, because we've known the growth message, the growth of data, the growth of use, the growth of connectivity, but also that the market dynamics are changing, and we have to really be looking very sharply to where new bottlenecks may arise, because, as I said, we still are very much with the same, and I think open enough regulatory systems that are evolving. Look at the new code, look at the DMA, the DSA, or the Data Act that we have just issued a statement on. But so we're trying to get our heads around how to make sure that we do keep the digital markets open, how to promote connectivity, and how to do that with the end user needs in mind.
Okay. Juan, I mean, obviously the probably one of the most important highlights of the report and discussed in the previous panel is that internet access connectivity is not in the same growth path than the other players in the internet value chain. How do you value the role of public policy and regulation in shifting these current dynamics and future trends in Europe?
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon already, everyone. Thank you very much, GSMA, Laszlo, for this invitation to Telefónica to be part of this panel. Well, I think that's a really important general question, but at this time in Europe, after the 2.5 years we've been living, I think the role of public policies is undisputable critical. We've gone through a pandemic. We have never thought this could happen. We are now in the middle of a terrible war, of an aggression to one European country by another European country. So we are now so clear about what is the role of public policies and how important this is for the future of Europe and for the future of a hyper sector as the one we are debating about today. And in this regard, I think we started this conversation talking about the digital decade plans and speaking about the Digital Compass 2030. I think those are the best news. In public policy terms, we need to have a clear objective to be able to build a policy. And I think the work done first by the European Commission already a year ago was an excellent job to define what are Europe digital plans and targets for the year 2030, and hopefully before the year 2030, because things are happening so rapidly that maybe it's too late to make those targets in 8-year times. We haven't spoken this morning about this third generation of internet and about the metaverse and Web 3.0, but it is something to very much bear into account, because things are happening so fastly that we need solutions before problems happen. So in this regard, I think we have the targets. But a second step, when we speak about public policies, is having a plan to meet those targets. And this is the work the Parliament and the European Commission are doing today. We very much welcome and want to support that work. But today we're discussing something that is critical to be able to build that plan. And this is the facts and figures about the telecom sector and about the overall value chain in the internet. And here we find that those targets will only be met if we all together, the whole value chain, make an effort and collaborate to meet these targets. Everyone in the value chain, we saw it currently showing us, all the segments in this value chain has a huge responsibility to meet the digital compass targets. The 11 projects without it and the 4 cardinals in this compass. Of course, we as connectivity companies have a great responsibility on the connectivity targets. And in this regard, then facts and figures take us to a critical situation to see, okay, we can commit to this is our purpose, but will we be capable to doing it? Apart from an excellent commitment, there are capabilities in the European industries to meet the targets. If we focus on the connectivity industry, I honestly think today there are not. And it was very interesting, the debate in the previous panel about sustainability when the return of capital is below the cost of capital. And well, economists explain us how easy the answer is to that question. Well, we are speaking about 8 years ahead. We are speaking about a huge investment to be made. We are willing to do this investment. So let's speak directly on what could we do. Apart from being very efficient, we've been working on cost for 10 years, focusing so much on cost on the other side of the market in terms of revenues and in terms of gathering those resources to be able to make those investments. And I think we have spoken about some very important things. I won't stand longer here, but we have spoken about having a pro-investment market structure. Even if this means consolidation in market, we could speak what kind of consolidation. We spoke about having a balance within these value chains that allows all segments in the value chains to receive the revenues that we think every segment merits because of the assets that contributes and because of the services that provide to the other segments. And we haven't spoken about it, that probably it is very much involved today in the analysis of European industrial policies, and this is the strategic autonomy and sovereignty of Europe. And we have very much heard about this sovereignty regarding energy, regarding defense, of course, regarding public health. Digital is probably as important and so critical for society as these other 3 elements of sovereignty we have mentioned. So we could be discussing about this for a few days, but at least to have some points to discuss as far as Laszlo you consider then relevant.
Thank you, Juan. Maybe I would pick up on the imbalance point, and then, because it's also related to the current debate we have in the context of the digital rights and principles about the contributions, the cost of infrastructure. We heard from commissioners, Executive Vice President Vestager, Commissioner Breton, that the Commission is working on to implement this principle. So, Pearse, what can you share at this stage? What are the ways in which the Commission foresees to implement the principles fair and proportionate contribution to various costs in the value chain?
There are 2 elements. The first, I mentioned the steps that we're already taking with the instruments which we already have under our control, which is to update on the basis of what we now know from the market with regard to whether it's state aids, but particularly then with regard to costs. However, the element of the disparities and perhaps imbalances in revenues is something which we are still looking at. And quite frankly, what Annemarie said is critical. You have to start from a fact-based input. And there, of course, this study is one of a number of inputs which we have seen. Of course, the Commission and national regulators will always seek to, shall we say, divide the facts from the advocacy which comes with it, although all views are welcome. And there, I would mention just, for example, another study done, I suppose I can mention WIC, which was on, for example, the peering market. And that's just another element. But we have to look at how does the market operate with regard to wholesale transfer and the wholesale market, and particularly in this case, peering. While we look at the end pricing model, the previous panel, there was a very clear solution from an investment bank that simply you need to raise your prices. But that doesn't work in the political context of Europe, and we were given the comparisons with the United States, where the bills are much higher. But Europe took a decision quite some time ago that we wanted access for all citizens. And we didn't want just basic access. We've always had universal service provisions. We wanted access to quality broadband. I could also observe that, was it Friday? The United States government has announced a very significant internet access program in which it will now seek to actually provide subvention, pay for the access costs, because what they don't have is internet access for all in a meaningful way. So we have imposed a cost on European operators. The fact is now, if we continue with our ambitions, that we continue to seek access for all European citizens to those services as they advance, then we have to look again as to whether our regulatory model is in somehow imposing not just perhaps unbalanced, or one could say unfair costs, but actually imposing costs which will stop the investment, which will mean that we cannot actually meet our ambitions. And that would be a critical conclusion. And so there is work going on to make sure that that is not the case. How do we address this issue of imbalances, particularly in the wholesale market, in the transactions, where one carrier has an obligation to, shall we say, provide basically unlimited capacity to another who has their own revenue stream independent of the relationship that they have with the carrier. That's something that we have to look at, and we are looking at actively.
Thank you. Josianne, is there, when you had the discussion of the digital decade program and in Parliament, what's your feeling? Is there a sentiment supportive towards the idea? What we just heard, that to broaden the players who could contribute to the network costs? Would Parliament support such a move, or what's your feeling at this stage?
During my consultations as the other shadows and the rapporteur, we met with a lot of telecom operators too, and I know that there was this strong request which wanted even certain wording to be inserted in the digital program. So whilst I do understand that there is this imbalance which we are speaking upon, and which even the Commission and Commissioner Breton spoke about publicly, and there's also the intention for a legislative proposal to be put forward by the end of the year. So yes, it's important that where there are imbalances, we regulate via law and regulate also via already existing instruments such as flexibility in state aid, which I really believe in. It must be seen to it that the proper instruments are picked up. And I don't think that the Digital Decade program is actually the proper fora to actually address this imbalance which seems to be developing. Having said that, we did include in the compromise amendments which were voted upon yesterday, and I also got the impression that Council included something on similar lines, where we stated also that convergent conditions for investments in digital infrastructures will be needed, notably to developing adequate frameworks so that all market actors benefiting from the digital transformation assume their social responsibilities and contribute to a competitive and functioning environment for public goods, services, and infrastructure for the benefit of all Europeans. So what we did is that we inserted this wording, which is also based on the digital declaration, which the wording is already there, and I believe that the concept is also points towards the fact that there needs to be further discussion, even if beyond the Digital Decade program, which as I stated, I don't believe is the proper instrument to address this, to see to it that there is fair contribution by all market actors. And this is very much important because we need to address and ensure two very important aspects. First of all, that there is a return on investment to those investors who are investing, to make sure even that we reach our targets when it comes to connectivity. So if it's our priority that as the European Union we have digital connectivity targets, ambitious ones, we need the investors there, which also need to have a return on investment to make sure that we achieve it. Secondly, also my colleague mentioned it, the fact that as the European Union we took a conscious decision that we need internet access, and may I also use the wording high quality access of the internet to all of our citizens. This is also a very important aspect that we should continue hammering in our discussions, and this relates also to the end customers. And for me, this is a very important aspect too that we need to keep in mind in this discussion. I even went further as a member of the European Parliament within the digital discussions that we have at the European Parliament, and we also had the Digital Transformation Working Group of the Conference on the Future of Europe, where I called, and we called also in the conference document, that internet access should be regarded as a fundamental right. And I really believe in this. But to achieve this, as said, we need the connectivity too. So to give the right to all the citizens, we need to make sure that the connectivity is there to readily available. So that's my contribution in that regard. But for sure, there is this constant problem which is being flagged by telecom operators, which I also spoke with during my consultations, and we need to see to it how we best address it through already existing instruments, but also through future legislation to make sure that we have a really internet ecosystem which is just and fair to all its users, investors, and contributors.
Very good. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll touch upon another issue, because the report talks about the so both technology players, telecom operators are trying to take advantage of the scale efficiencies, and when you also talked a little bit about the that is not a new topic, but there are new developments in the value chain. I might, Annemarie, you are in a very lucky situation because you can see that both from a competition point of view and a telecom regulator's point of view. So
and a consumer
and consumer point of view, of course. So how do you see now the market structure? I don't know, the minimum efficient scale in connectivity, is that changing over time because of the changes in the internet value chain? What's your view on that important policy lever?
That's a difficult. If you look at the competition, as I said, if you look at the competition mechanisms, I do agree with various speakers today that looking at the whole digital system, I think talking in terms of an ecosystem makes much more sense than talking in terms of a value chain. That I think is one. And then second, one of the competition mechanisms that you see and that are described in the Kearney report that we are discussing today, but there are also partly apparent in the WIC study that Pearse already mentioned, is the way that this ecosystem is changing in terms of where previously you had a kind of between rights, for example, the politics is on rights and investment, but for us it's of course demand and supply, and of course we had in Europe, we have a sort of virtuous circle of demand, of services offered via the internet. Think of all the things and the killer apps that we had on 4G to make sure that 4G started to fly, and that we're still waiting for 5G rollout to make sure that that is going to fly, and this is virtual circle. And all of a sudden, and then you have, of course, the content providers and the infrastructure providers are in a kind of virtuous circle. That's what you try to achieve, of course, with investment and not building, as I would always say, building empty cathedrals. So the fiber itself is not the goal, of course. It is the high quality connectivity. So there you had the content suppliers and the telco suppliers in a virtuous circle. But what we see now is in the ecosystem looking for the next cycle of that virtuous circle. You see that the competition game is changing because of the hyperscalers and the peering, for example, getting into a whole different, more competitive environment in backbone, for example, which going to resilience as a telecom regulator, I really like the fact that we have all these different backbone systems throughout Europe now. You have to get your head around what is public, what is private, what is regulated, what is not. Is it open enough? But it does give a whole different view on the competitive landscape, which I think also is in the Kearney report. So that is where I think that having both views on the competitive game, and does it still help in this cycle in the European context, on the one hand, and what is regulation, is it ex-ante regulation, and is it still helpful? And in that respect, I do think that, as Pearse said, there are rules and regulations that are being revised, which they should, on a regular basis and a constant cycle. But please let's not forget, I think that, for example, with the new code that we used to talk about like 5 years, that seems like ages ago. But for example, that gives us, we talked about infrastructure sale-off, but it gives us new ways as regulators to make sure that we look differently at the position of the towers and to intervene there if it is necessary, to look at sharing, to look at co-investment. All these instruments are in there to make sure that we, as regulators, in a system that is agreed, that is stable, can promote investment and rollout of very high capacity networks.
Indeed, thank you. I mean, landscape is changing, regulation is changing, EU competition framework is under review. And how do these changes do they reflect the the expectations on for scale in the industry, or what you refer to? That's one of the important policy levers. How do you see that development?
Well, I think the conversation we're having today shows that the mindset is changing, that we are approaching a new time, and we are approaching a new time with a new view on what can be done from a public policy point of view and from a regulatory point of view. The discussion we're having today was probably unthinkable 5 years ago. In competition, in merger control terms, that I assume, Laszlo, is a relevant part of your question, I really think we will see if something is changing or not once we have a big, important case analyzed by DigiCom for the first time. Rules don't need a change from my point of view, but the way we approach, the way the European Commission approaches a transaction in a particular country with specific players merging is what needs to have a pro-investment approach that, from my point of view, lacks the analysis that have been done so far. So this is the key point. And I understand a pro-investment approach not only in clearing a particular transaction or not, because there are two facts very relevant here. One is blocking or clearing a transaction. The other one is what remedies come with that authorization. And remedies make the big difference. Remedies can try, as from my point of view have happened so far, to put the market in the situation it was pre-merging these two companies, so lowering the barriers of entry for a particular remedy taker. In a way, you take that market to the previous situation as fast as possible, and this means intervening very dramatically on the market, because you need to create an ecosystem for that new player to compete in artificial conditions against the players that are already in the market. From my point of view, that is a very static approach to a merger analysis. You are just trying to guarantee the same situation that was previous to the merger. If we see important cases going in front of DigiCom and to the Commission itself, and we see a really pro-investment outcome, then we will need to see an analysis where the outcome can be a smaller number of players in that particular country, if the conclusion is that competition is guaranteed among those players, not necessarily introducing a new one. I think this is going to be the key aspect in those transactions that will come soon to the analysis of the European Commission.
Thank Joanne. Maybe I'll stop here and look at around the audience, whether I see any questions, or alternatively, ask my colleagues, not on the chat. Yes, I see one question here.
There's another.
Can you please introduce yourself, and then the question, please.
Yes, hello. I'm James Thompson. I'm an analyst with Cullen International. I was just thinking about. So a lot of this comes down to, well, should telcos charge more for their broadband subscriptions? And then the pushback from the tech industry against getting a contribution from them is, well, you shouldn't double dip. You shouldn't be taking money from both sides of the market. Just put up your prices for broadband. And it seems that, with the cost of living crisis, politically that's quite difficult. Pearse raised that point. Luke's raised that point as well, that in Europe that wouldn't seem to be easy to do. But in the tech sector, there are examples of double dipping. I'm thinking about, if you think about Apple, it makes its money from selling devices, but it also takes a 30% cut in its app store. So it's making money both from its devices, but also from being a sales channel, basically, for online services. So there are examples of double dipping in the tech industry. So, I'm not sure that the tech industry saying, well, you shouldn't do that is so strong.
Thanks, James. So I understand the question is more about the multi-sided nature of the market and how policy and regulation should approach that. I don't know, is there anyone in the panel who wanted to comment on that? Annemarie? Yep.
You may be aware, but we are in very heavy discussions with Apple at this moment on their charging the 30%. So yes, I do think that is problematic, and we have taken steps.
Pearse, you wanted to?
Well, I didn't hear a question. I heard a statement.
That's true.
A factual one.
So we are familiar with the way the market is operating. From our perspective, we would tend to concentrate more on whether there is a subsidization, an unfair subsidization, rather than double dipping.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Laszlo,
yes.
If you allow me, I will make this very dynamic. I will make a question to Annemarie. When you say you're worried about this 30% Apple is charging, you're worried, I assume, about the 30%, not about any case of double tipping, as we are.
No, exactly. No, this was just a shortcut. It's just to say that the principles that govern the way that we look at are we of the view that this is an open digital economy, an open digital market or not? We have had at the ACM worries about some of the charging policies by Apple and have taken action. So there where you see a market problem, and it could be subsidizing as such or however you name it, but then there is this whole box of instruments that we have and that we start investigating, seeing if there is a bottleneck, if there is abuse of market power. And in this particular case, we have started, we are in discussions, as is the Commission, of course. So we are looking at distortion, at practices that may be seen as illegal distortions of an abuse of market power.
Perfect, thank you. I see one more question from Luke, if you can be brief, and then we need to wrap up, I believe.
I try. I'm Luc Hendricks. I'm the Director General of ECTA, so the European Competitive Telecommunications Association. So we represent the competitive forces in Europe. A question about the number of market players and the consolidation. So if we look at France, for fully integrated players, what I would consider on the consumer market, the most competitive market in Europe. Lots of investment year after year, the investment grow for the last 6 years. And then we compare with Germany, where the mobile market is divided in 3 operators. Are there more investments? Are there better coverage? Is there more better service? And there is absolutely no regulation. So why is that? If you would look at the Belgian market, it's the same. So very low competition. Are the investment rates, the service, and so on better? I don't see it. So why is that?
I'm sorry, Luc. We've worked together for years. Is that really the question now? Because we're trying to continue to fight the fight that's been going on for a number of years which I'm sure from your perspective, or for that matter, the historical incumbents' perspective, the Commission has never answered properly. But now, as we saw from the presentation in the earlier session, the threat is external. Can I say it that way, to be as dramatic as what you've said? And the business model, whether you are a challenger, as ECTA sometimes says itself, or an incumbent, is from other players who are breaking into the telecom model, and where the free ride or the services that they bring, or whatever your perspective is the discussion we have to have now.
Pearse, I fully, absolutely agree with you, and that's why, because I have to ask a question, that I frame it in the way I do, because if you look at the value chain, and one of the best way that a company can have to extract value of the value chain is to create abundance of supply downstream and upstream, and to create shortage of supply where you operate. But we are all agreed that we would all benefit if we have abundance of supplies in all the elements of the value chain.
I think you are going a little bit further than a question.
Yeah. Then I will give you, you deserve an answer then, but I think actually you've already got it from Annemarie, is that there is a lot of flexibility within the regulatory framework for sharing, for mutualization, and also then for, including in terms of investment. And we would see also, without running into competition problems, for literally for the mutualization and provision of services to a certain extent. And that is where we need to be sure that we are properly exploiting every sort of tool that is available under the current regulatory framework, in order to perhaps have a situation in which there may be, and I'm not predicting, and it's not a sort of an outcome that we want, but where there may be convergence, but certainly whether you are a new telco or a 50-year-old telco, the challenge is now coming from elsewhere.
Yeah. But Pearse, as I say, I fully agree with that. And so the debate is not about how is the competition going within the telecom part of the value chain. It's on the other parts of the value chain, and how we create the level playing field and the imbalance of bargaining power between the different parts of the value chain.
Thank you, Luc. Thank you, panel. As I see this, that we will have a lot more debate about these topics, and unfortunately we are running out of time. And I wanted to thank the speakers for the excellent contributions. I'm sure there will be other opportunities also for us and in Brussels to discuss some of the topics we touched upon. May I ask you to join me thanking the panel, and a lot of applause. Giving back to Daniel.
Thank you, Laszlo. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the very interesting panel. Sorry that we had to cut it short, and also want to congratulate you for your endurance, because I think it was 3 hours without a break, and after COVID times, I know it's a huge achievement. So thanks again for coming. Thanks for everybody who followed online, more than 200 people. And I hope we can contribute it to the debate, as our aspiration was this morning to contribute with evidence and provide a platform. And now I would like to invite those of you who are here. We have a standing lunch over there, so please enjoy the lunch, and we can further discuss. Thank you again. And last but not least, we are having another event on June the 15th, a kind of a reception. So we would like to see you back here again. So thanks again. Enjoy.